I've known Doug DeMuro as a friend for many years before either of us thought about putting a video on YouTube, but I'm so proud of all the success that he's had with his channel, with Cars and Bids, with the cars that he's acquired, the cars that he's reviewed, and certainly appreciative of the support that he's been and the resource that he's been as I started and have continued to try to grow VINwiki. And over the last year, we've had a lot of Doug's best car stories featured on the channel here, and in today's video, I've compiled his best ones into a single video for you to enjoy. And I hope that you'll also check out today's video sponsor, BetterHelp. Anxiety tends to peak for most people in the springtime, and our sponsor, BetterHelp, can pair you with a therapist to help you get through whatever it is that you're going through, whether it's a relationship issue, depression, issues at work, or you're just anxious about all the things that we've got to do this time of year. I know in my life, you're trying to make these videos perfect and do the best things for the company, and obviously you got family things going on. They want to plan the perfect trips and all this thing, and the pressure can be crippling. Sometimes it's hard to see whatever it is that you're dealing with as good enough and move forward. And most BetterHelp members do come to them for support with anxiety, and 69% of those report improvement in their symptoms within just 6 weeks. And BetterHelp makes it super easy to get started. You just fill out their questionnaire about what you're going through, and they will match you usually within just a couple of days with a great licensed therapist that can help you with whatever it is that you're going through. And if it happens to not be a great fit, it's very easy with no additional cost to make your next appointment with a different therapist. BetterHelp makes sure that their therapists are all licensed, and they've got a customer support team that's always ready to help with whatever you need. So click the link in the description below or go to betterhelp.com/VINwiki to get started. You'll save 10% on your first month of therapy. And whether it's anxiety, depression, a confidence issue, something in a relationship, trouble at work, whatever it is that's causing you some trouble, BetterHelp can help and help you live a better life.
The guy was insane who I bought it from, and he locked himself out of his own home during the test drive. Here's a crazy story that has spanned my life, my car ownership life. As you remember from our old days, I always loved those Mercedes AMG station wagons. In fact, I always loved high performance station wagons in general. I've had an Audi RS2, which is really special. I had a CTS-V station wagon here in Atlanta, and I've had now 2 Mercedes AMG wagons. Back in the day, back in 2012, the only way to find an AMG wagon for sale, there was a thread on MB World. And people would post when they would pop up on AutoTrader, or sometimes people would just post like, I'm selling mine, I'm thinking about selling mine, whatever. And that was the only way. This was before Bring a Trailer, this was before Cars and Bids, and it was also, 2012 there had only been one generation of the car sold, which was the 211 model that was sold from like 05 to 2010 or 2009. And so these days, the wagons are more common because there have been more made. And these days, you can find them on Bring a Trailer and on Cars and Bids. There's like 3 listed every week. But back then, I swear, there was a thread on MB World, and that was the only way you could find out about these cars. I desperately wanted one. It was like the King station wagon. I really wanted one. I just spent my whole life on that MB World thread. I would reload it. I had search alerts on AutoTrader and on cars.com, and one of them listed for sale in Indianapolis. It was listed as being silver, and that was kind of my dream color, and it had the 3rd row, which the first gen AMG wagons offered, and they stopped, the first US gen. After that, they stopped offering it. And I really wanted the 3rd row because it seemed like a cool idea. The story of going to Indiana to buy the car is actually a pretty good story in itself. The guy was insane who I bought it from, and he locked himself out of his own home during the test drive and had to call his dad to come unlock his house. But I bought that car. It turned out to not be silver. It was pewter, which is sort of Mercedes had previously called it desert silver. It's sort of a heinous gold that really looks bad. So I bought that car. It was an 07 E63 AMG wagon. And what happened was the search alert had been set up, and it emailed me, and 2 seconds after it emailed me, I called the dude. I was like, I want the car, I'll pay full price. And he told me he had already gotten a call from somebody else. He was so insane that he had listed the car for sale, and then he was planning to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks, like the next day. And I'm like, dude, so I had to wait for him. I gave him a deposit, I had to wait for him to get back from Hawaii. Fine. Flew to Indianapolis, bought the car, drove it back to Atlanta where I lived. That car, I had for several years in Atlanta, or for a year in Atlanta. And I even took it on a mountain drive that you organized all those years ago, where a Carrera GT was one of the other cars, and Lambos and Ferraris, and I'm driving my stupid AMG wagon, right? But that was my car. It was a pewter '07 E63 wagon. We did the mountain drives. I drove that car around. I even at one point, one of the cool things I did, there was this company that used to organize runway drag races. And one of the ones was up in North Georgia. There was a runway, they organized at some private airstrip, a runway drag race, and I dragged that AMG wagon against a Carrera GT. And one time we even took it to the Atlanta Dragway. One of my favorite memories of all, my friend Andrew Brannon, who you may remember, he sat in the third row. And we would drag against like modded Camaro. You know, this was a 507 horsepower car. It was pretty legit, especially back in 2012. And we would run against like modded fourth gen Camaros, and Andrew would wave to the people as we pulled away while he was sitting in the back with his helmet on. I had that AMG wagon for a year. We had all these fun memories in it. You know, my friend, I used to take, when I worked in an office, we would all go out to lunch in it, and my friends would sit in the back in the third row. So there'd be 7 of us in the car. Like, we did all sorts of fun stuff in this AMG wagon. Eventually, I decided to quit my job to focus on writing about cars and eventually becoming a video person. And I decided I needed to consolidate. I had like 4 or 5 cars, one of which was that AMG wagon. And I basically sold all of my cars to get a CarMax Range Rover, which was going to be my rational vehicle because it had the warranty and I needed to focus on other stuff than just perpetually accumulating and buying and selling and dealing with cars. So I sold the AMG wagon. And guess how I sold it? Via the thread on the MB World forums. And a guy named Doug Bryan bought it in Dallas, Texas. And Doug was, he was a fellow Doug, and he was a really nice dude. And this was about the time that I was sort of starting to take off in terms of writing for Jalopnik and that kind of thing. And so not only did he buy the car, but he always kind of kept in touch because my career sort of took off and he followed me and he thought it was kind of cool. A few years later, maybe it's 2017, he lists the car for sale on Bring a Trailer. This is before Cars and Bids existed. He would have obviously used Cars and Bids now. But so he lists the car for sale on Bring a Trailer, and he sent me an email before and he said, hey, I'm selling the car. You know, he had 5 years out of it. It's been cool, you know, our car that we had together. I think, oh, this is cool. You know, this is the car will find a new owner, whatever. And at the end of the experience, at the end of the sale, he tells me that he has sold the car to Atlanta, which I thought was kind of an interesting coincidence. But that was kind of the last I asked about it because it had been years now and he moved on to a Panamera and life was over. So I didn't really think much about the E63 wagon again until 2 years ago. I'm in Atlanta, walking down the street, and there it is, sitting just randomly street parked in Inman Park, which is my favorite neighborhood. It's in town in Atlanta. There's the AMG wagon, my old car. And of course, I lose it. I had known the car went back to Atlanta, but I didn't know that, I mean, I owned the car maybe a mile away. And remember, it had gone to Dallas, Texas for 5 years in between. He could have sold it anywhere in the world, and it came all the way back to Atlanta, literally back to the same neighborhood where I lived. That in itself is a crazy coincidence, and the story could end there and be a pretty interesting story, but it doesn't. Now it's 2 years after that. I'm here back in Atlanta, my favorite place. I love it here. I wish I could move back here. And this time I'm staying in Inman Park at an Airbnb. I love this neighborhood. I love in town Atlanta. I think it's so special. We're checking in the house and, you know, drive by that house where the car was, and the car's still there. So the AMG wagon is still sitting on the street, my old car, and I walk by it and it is rough now. It is rough. It has been hit in the back. The taillight is in pieces. The front bumper is hanging off. The little guard for the headlight washer has fallen off. Like, it is rough. Hasn't been cleaned in forever. It is in rough shape. I'm like, wow, that car has had a bit of a fall from grace. But over the last week, as we've been in Atlanta, we've been walking by the car, saying, there's my old car. And I've been telling, you know, the people who came, I saw it. I used to own that car, like a car like that. I'm like, no, that was my car 7 years ago. Although actually now it's 12 years ago that I own that car and it's still around. Here's the craziest part of the story. I'm driving up here today. You live quite far from Inman Park. We are 50 minutes, 55 minutes with traffic today from where I am. I get off at your exit. I'm driving up here 1 mile from your house. I get a stoplight behind that very same car. What the hell are the odds? This metro area has 6.5 million people. We are probably 40 miles from where the car lives, and I see it again. And I took a picture. I freaked out. I don't know who owns it anymore. I don't know the guy's name. I'm sure Doug, the guy who sold it to him, does. But like, I can't. Like, why is this car still in my life? And I couldn't believe it. But it's in some shopping center, like walking distance to here right now. And I guess the current guy is an architect and he mostly does like the historic properties down in town. And he's just driving it around. I could not believe I see it again so far away from like the city. Like, what are the odds? Why does this car continue in my life? There are several times where I pulled off the road where I pulled off at a like a rest stop or a gas station just to get water so I could pour it on myself. Like, I would get a bottle of water, dump it on myself, get back in the car, keep driving. That was air conditioning. I have this YouTube channel and I do car stuff, and I'm known for doing car stuff on YouTube. But even before, and this is true of you also, even before the YouTube channel, I did crazy stuff, like with cars. I didn't need it to be on film, and then I got it on film, and then I started making money from it. It was great. It was like Hoovy. Hoovy would be Hoovy if he didn't have a camera and wasn't making money from it. But he's very fortunate that he can make some money doing this. So in 2011, in July of 2011, I decided what I needed was a Lotus Elise. And I didn't have much money at the time, but I realized something that remains true, which is you could buy and sell an Elise for the same money, and they were pretty reliable. At the time, it was 30 grand. It's gotten a little higher. But for 30 grand, you could buy a 0506 Elise, drive it for however long you wanted, and sell it for 30 grand. That was just the rule. But I really wanted a bright color. A lot of the Elises around me were silver or black, and it was like, that's kind of isn't the point of the car. I want to show off. You know, I was 23. I wanted to show off. I wanted to have this exotic car. So I really wanted a bright color. And what I really wanted was Krypton green. But as I recall, that color didn't come till like 07, and I could really only afford an 05 and maybe stretch to an 06. And so I ended up settling for an orange one. But the catch was, it was in San Jose, and I lived in Atlanta. In July of 2011, I flew. This is the kind of thing I would do now. It's actually the kind of thing I wouldn't do now. I'm beyond, I think it's insane that I ever did this, let alone didn't make up videos about it. Like, the only way you can justify a cross-country Elise road trip is by making YouTube videos, but I did it just for funsies. And so I bought the Elise and I drove it from San Jose to Atlanta. There were several problems. One was, I arrived in San Jose to pick up the car late at night, and the dude was Indian and came from this like very traditional Indian family, and his mother insisted, I just flown across the country, she insisted I must stay for dinner. And she made this giant spread, and I was driving to Santa Cruz that night from San Jose. It's like an hour and a half, and I was like, I'm in this Lotus Elise. I've never driven this car before. It's dark. I need to get on the road. And she's like, no, you must have more food. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta get out of here. But fine. So I stayed, I had the meal with the family, whatever. The next problem was the Elise came with a soft top or a hard top. The hard top was on the car. Now, the Elise didn't have a place to stow the hard top. And so if I wanted the hard top, which obviously I did for myself and for resale purposes, I had to leave the hard top on the car. And I'm tall, so getting in and out of the car, I had to do the whole cross-country drive with the hard top on. It's actually quite easy to get in and out of an Elise with no top on. You just kind of plop in. But with the top on, it is an act of like unbelievable contortion when you're my height. I had to do it. So I did it. I had to do that every time I got in the car. And then the seller of the car neglected to mention to me that the air conditioning was not operant. Now, in his defense, he lived in the Bay Area. It's a Lotus Elise. He probably didn't use the air all that often. He may not have realized that it was inoperant. I mean, the Bay, when we were at Porsche, when I worked at Porsche Corporate, would get cars in that, didn't have air conditioning, 911 GT3s. We would send them to the Bay because that's the one place where maybe people could get away with not having AC. I didn't discover it didn't have air conditioning until day 2. Now, it's July of 2011. And my first stop was to go to Santa Barbara to see a friend of mine. And then I had to drive Southern California across the country through the desert. And that was a hell that I cannot even begin to explain. Had the windows down. There are several times where I pulled off at a rest stop or a gas station just to get water so I could pour it on myself. Like, I would get a bottle of water, dump it on myself, get back in the car, keep driving. That was air conditioning. It was so hot in that car. Because remember, the hard top is on. I can't take the roof off. So I'm sitting there like this, unbelievably, it's buzzy, it's loud, it is hot, it is hell. For some reason, my mother agrees to meet me in Las Vegas and drive from Vegas to Denver, where she lives with me. Picked her up in Vegas, and we did the drive. And it was this hellish, and my mother is not into this kind of thing at all. She thought it was like a fun adventure, I think. It was 2 days on the road. We got to go through the mountains. We went over Independence Pass in Aspen. Like, it was actually kind of a fun, that was the best part of the drive. Like from Vegas to Denver, you go through the beautiful Red Rocks in Utah. You go through Western Colorado mountains. Like, it is actually a pretty cool part of the drive. And as we're coming over the mountains in Western Colorado, the check engine light went on. And I'm like, oh my God, I have so much longer to go in this road trip. I got to drive back to Atlanta. Like, this is going to be horrible. And my mom is with me. I'm like, what if this thing breaks down? So I took it to a Toyota dealer, Bighorn Toyota in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. And I said, listen, this says Toyota Motor. Could you just read the code? He's like, nah, we won't look at that. It's like, please, I'm on a cross-country road trip. He's like, nah, sorry, it's not gonna happen. See ya. And I was like, okay, fine, I guess. Whatever, that was my life. I have a suspicion he had been asked before to do Lotus service. Like in Western Colorado, there was no Lotus. So if the 1 or 2 guys in that area, Grand Junction, Glenwood, who had cars like that, did get a ticket. That's another thing that happened. You know, it was bright orange sports car, and you drive a bright orange sports car in the middle of nowhere, and like, you are a sore thumb regardless of what you're doing. You know, I made a goal in that car not to be the fastest dude on the road because you're gonna stick out. And yet I'm driving through on I-70 in the middle of Kansas, and I see a cop way up ahead. I mean, like a little dot of a cop, and he's slowing down, eventually pulls on the shoulder. I go by him and he immediately pulls out and pulls me over. And he like claimed that he had got me on radar as he was driving like a quarter mile up the road, but I thought the whole thing was a bunch of BS. Meanwhile, I'm on the seller's plates because so I'm like, I don't know what's gonna happen here. But he just gave me a ticket and I was on my way, and that was that. And I actually thought it was really hot in the Southern California desert, but I dropped off my mom in Denver, picked up my best friend in Denver, and then he came the rest of the way with me to Atlanta. When we got into the South in July, that was heat. I mean, Arkansas, I remember we went through a drive-through in Arkansas, and it was like intolerable. Like, it was literally torture. Just sitting there in the drive-through, just this sweltering heat. It was absolute hell. So we made it back to Atlanta. And I remember in Eastern Alabama being like, we're gonna do it. Like, this is gonna work. I can't believe it, but this is gonna work. But the thing about having a Lotus Elise is that by the end of that drive, I was already tired of the car. Like, it was like, this car is hell. You know what's funny? When I do the drive now, because I do it twice a year, across country from California, Massachusetts, and then back, in a very comfortable car with self-driving, adaptive cruise, cooled seats. Sometimes I'll pass 70s cars on the road that some guys out on a great American road trip, and I'll think to myself, I can't believe that was the norm. People would just do that back in the day. And so I kind of owned it for a little while, and then my friends all thought it was cool. Within 6 months, they didn't think it was cool anymore. And it was like, do we really have to take it? Like, it's so low and difficult to get in and loud and annoying and attention, obnoxious. And the other thing I didn't like about that car was it was pretty fragile. I had come out of having these company cars for Porsche. That I worked for Porsche. I had several 911s in a row. And that car was a much more fragile car than a 911. You know, the hood, which was also the trunk, was like this flimsy piece. And if you pulled on the windshield wrong when you were getting in the car, you could bend the windshield frame. And I was used to driving these German sports cars. I'm like, what is this trash? So I sold it. I drove it cross country, and I only maybe had it for a few months after that. I sold it to a guy locally in Atlanta, who then sold it to someone in Abilene, Texas, who it now has like 85,000 miles, and it's still in Abilene. And that's the one car that I talk about sometimes where people are like, yeah, I live in Abilene. I see it around sometimes. I'm like, oh, my old Lotus. That's kind of cool. But that was my Lotus Elise cross-country story. I will never do that type of trip again. It was hell. No cruise control, no air conditioning, pure hell. The single greatest story that I was ever able to write when I worked for Jalopnik was the story of Ed Bolian breaking the cross-country record. A lot of people don't know this, but Ed and I were friends way before we were ever on YouTube. We were just like people, human people, like regular people. I was writing for Jalopnik, and I remember that Ed came to me, I think after the run had happened, and was like, I just broke the record. Will you write a piece about it? At the time, my writing on Jalopnik was like columns. Like, I would write like humor columns, and I had developed a pretty good following as a result of that because my stories had a little bit more personality than just the regular writer's stories. And so it made sense for me to kind of be the guy to like deliver this piece. The problem with writing about it was that it was a very illegal thing. And Jalopnik's audience was very, I mean, the entire internet, but the Jalopnik's audience was very like, you did this. There was some anxiety about whether that was okay, but I figured I gotta write this story. And I didn't even really contact my editors before I wrote the story. I was just like, we gotta get the story out and we'll see what happens. We met at like a coffee shop north of Atlanta. I remember you basically went through the whole story of the record and like how it had been, your preparation for it, the people you chose to go on it, how it had happened, etc. And we basically sat there for probably a couple hours and like you told me the whole thing. And I remember even then sitting there thinking like, this is the story of my life and I have to like write the hell out of it. Like I have to make it like amazing. At the time, I didn't know your co-driver Dave. I didn't know him, but I knew Dan, who was like your passenger. After talking to you for several hours about like, okay, here's what happened. And I wanted to get the whole story down so I could write this story well. I remember I called Dan for like his version of events because I wanted to get some quotes in there from him. I'll never forget there are a lot of things that I'll never forget about that whole situation, but I'll never forget that one of the things he told me was that it had not gone that well for you guys just before you ran. And I remember you got pulled over for making a illegal right on red in Manhattan. It was like a bad omen. And I remember he told me, and then I later told you, that he considered bailing. Like you guys had gone to some restaurant like right before you were gonna start the trip, and he literally was almost about to say out of his mouth, like, I'm not gonna do this, and decided against it. And so he rode with you in the tire. But so we went and sat and talked for several hours. I got the whole story from you, and I remember going home and being like, I need to not do anything tonight and just sit down and write this story. I remember that night, truly like the story came to me as if there was someone else writing it. Like it just flowed, like it was very easy. Very long, probably the longest published piece I've ever written. It's just a tremendous story. I mean, it was like a really good story. We set the cross-country record. And I remember at the time, the cross-country record had been kind of, especially among a certain group of car enthusiasts, like a pretty big deal. Alex Roy had written this book about his attempts to break the record. It was like a very special thing, you know. A lot of people think it is illegal and awful and terrible and that people should be punished for doing it, but I always felt that it was cool. Jalopnik immediately agreed that it was worth publishing and worth writing. And they knew, my editor, Matt Hardigree, he knew there was going to be some blowback from the comments about glorifying this heinously illegal act, right? And I remember we added some softer language in the story to try to, hey, these guys were as careful as you can be. But I also remember that my editors at Jalopnik weren't sure they believed the story and had me go and write a lot of allegedlys in the piece. Because you had data, it's hard to like know what's real and what's fake. And also it had become clear to us that now that the story was out there, other people were gonna find out about it and we wanted to break it. We didn't wanna really verify every inch of the data, and we called your data company and they like washed their hands clean of it. You remember that? They were like, he used the data is genuine, but we don't know anything about any illegal acts. So we published the story. It was only a couple days later, and I remember I was in Nashville for a press launch of the Nissan Pathfinder Hybrid, which was one model year and utter trash. And I'd be stunned if even one still exists to this day. And what a horrible waste of my time on such a special day. But of course, we didn't know it would be such a special day. We launched the story and it instantly became like the internet's biggest sensation. Just Jalopnik writing the story and like publishing it. And at that point, my involvement was kind of over, but it was enough. The story was out there and there hadn't been a new challenger to the record in many years. And it was kind of viewed that like no one would really even try anymore. There was a lot more traffic, harder to evade the police, etc. And so like the fact that you broke it and broke it by such an enormous amount was a big deal in that community. And in the general car, this is always an interest of Americans, the cross-country drive. And the fact that someone could do it so quickly, people are very interested in that. It publishes, it goes live, and I remember it's just a huge, huge, huge deal. And there were a few interesting things that I remember almost in the immediate aftermath. One was, one of the comments on Jalopnik was a guy who said, I was in St. Louis in the middle of the night and somebody drove past me in a Mercedes and I was wondering what that was. And I was like, huh. Like that's, wow. Like that, to me, that always stood out for me. Could have been lying, but like the way he wrote the comment, I will like kind of never forget that that was like a very special, like, oh, an interesting validation from a random observer. I met Dave Black at like Cars and Coffee the next week, and he brought the car. And that was the first time I had met Dave. The second time I met Dave. The first time, Dave's story was so bizarre. Dave had owned like a Jetta sport wagon and then decided to buy a Gallardo. And that's how you met him at the Lambo dealer, right? And you were like, find somebody who's crazy enough to do this with me. Well, Dave was just this kind of like random, he was like, all right, yeah, I'll probably do it. And so he didn't, I don't think, realize the fame that was about to come his way, at least in this small circle of individuals. And then I remember Dan telling me that he almost bailed. And those were all interesting. And then there was some blowback from some of the other people in the world of this, most notably from Alex Roy, who for some reason like scapegoated me as the writer of the story, even though I didn't do anything. He had always enjoyed kind of the notoriety of being the guy who had the record, which more notoriety came to him from that. Like was kind of a writer and sort of in the car scene, and especially New York City. And I think he was always a little bit miffed that he had kind of gotten taken down, and by a pretty wide margin. Like I have a suspicion he had written this book about like all the prep that he did for the record, how hard it was. And I just think that he was like a little dismayed, like it just, it was beaten by such a big number. But he kind of was anti-Doug for a long period of time there. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but I think that that's all over. Then I remember there was some fear that the police would come for you, because Alex had, smartly or not, he had carefully waited until a year had gone. Statute of limitations was up on all the speeding laws. And you had decided not to, which your point was some of the laws, you could really make it into like a reckless, and like it could really be like some of the statute of limitations could really be dragged on if someone wanted to be crazy, but it would be a lot of work for any jurisdiction to prove. And they never did, I think, right? There was a fear even like the day the article went live that the local police would like come and try to pick you up at the behest of some other department. That never happened. Now that I think about it, CNN reposted it. It was a massive story on CNN, the biggest story on CNN.com internationally. It was a huge deal, in part because also no one had tried to break the record for so long. Because what ended up happening then when other people kind of got in and started then chipping away at your time, it wasn't as big of a deal. Like your situation was such a big deal because it was like the first person in a long time. People had forgotten this was even a thing. It was cool. And I remember you telling me something that I always admired, which was like, it went wall-to-wall viral for a few weeks and then started kind of dying down, but you still had the story to be able to tell people forever. You were like, I got exactly what I wanted to get out of it. Just like a little bit of notoriety. It was fun. It was cool. We did it. We set this record. There's really not much more to it. Like it was never going to become like you were going to go to Hollywood and become but it was what it was. And it was the fun thing. And I thought it was really cool. And it really was the most special story I've ever been lucky enough to write. I got emails from other people saying, anytime you want to write anything for me, now you can. That was one of the things that sort of started to build me up on Jalopnik. There's no question. And just being able to get that access, we just knew each other. It was that level of like kind of randomness of it happening. Montana plates, questionable insurance, no garage, but I got a Ferrari. I had a Ferrari 360 and I bought it. This was a huge deal. I bought it January of 2013, right as I quit my job to write about cars. I took out a massive bank loan. I was shooting my shot. I was going to buy a Ferrari 360 and make videos about it on YouTube and write about it for Jalopnik. It was a big deal because these days, like everyone has a special car. On YouTube, it's not uncommon. People have Bugattis, for God's sake. Now there's like a bunch of content creators with crazy cars. Stradman has a Koenigsegg, Ed Bolian's got a Bugatti. But in 2013, that was not the case. And in fact, I was a big deal for being a guy who had a Ferrari 360 on the internet. Like just having that was like made me a sensation at the time. I bought the car kind of knowing that a regular guy driving this special car would be an interesting video series. I bought it with this massive bank loan. I bought it from Florida. I have a rule against buying cars from Florida because, well, Freddie. But I have a rule against buying cars in Florida, but unbelievably, this one was tremendously well maintained. The guy had every service record in a laminated folder. He did not belong in Florida. He should have been somewhere else. He was like very fastidious and meticulous. It was a stick 360 at a time when stick cars had no value premium, which is almost hard to believe now. But truly, at that time, TIP was a new TIP, as I call it, but F1 was a new thing, basically, more or less. In 99, it had just come out. They had kind of refined it through the 360, and it was like a hot thing. That's sort of what some people preferred it, and some people preferred the manual, and so it was no value premium. I knew I wanted a stick. I found a stick. I flew down to Florida to buy it. And at the time, what I would do was I had this thing called the Doug car, where I would announce to my audience I was buying a fun special car, and I would let them kind of vote on what it would be. And more or less what I used to do is I would get it down to like the top 5, and then I would pick the one I wanted the most of the top 5. Although some years I just picked the number 1, and that's how I ended up with a Hummer. I bought the 360 in Florida, and I drove it home. I could not afford this car. It is impossible for me to explain how much I cannot afford this car. Take the least supercar of 40 YouTuber that exists right now, Freddie with his P1, I was way worse. I could make the payments as long as money kept coming in, but the loan had required that I put down like half because I had no credit history. So I had used all my cash on the loan, and then I had to make these payments. So not only did I register that thing deep Montana, I mean, I was like as Montana as it got, but like I could barely afford insurance. And I'll never forget, what ended up happening was I was waiting for a ticket to drop off my insurance because the insurer that would do Montana wouldn't insure me while the ticket was still on. So I got like insurance from State Farm at an astronomical level, but I didn't tell them about Montana because I was sketchy. Once the ticket dropped off, I canceled the State Farm insurance, then insured with the people who would do Montana, and then I was like, okay. But I was still driving around with this like third-rate insurance broker with Montana plates. And I remember everywhere I'd go, I'd park the car and I would put a Georgia plate on because I didn't want people to see. That was so bad. I bought the car and I drove it home, and the audience really did respond very well. However, I was perpetually terrified. If something had broken, I couldn't afford it. Now, in retrospect, I know the 360 is actually a pretty reliable car. I don't know if you remember this, but you took me for a ride in a 360, or we test drove one or something before I bought mine, just to so I could see what it was like. It actually is a pretty reliable car. There wasn't gonna be any major thing that happened, especially because I bought a later one. The earlier cars had a few little issues, but I bought an 04, which was essentially the final year. It was the final year of the coupe. It was never gonna have problems. But the first night I brought it home, I will never forget this. Drove the car all the way from Orlando to Atlanta, which is a long drive. Parked it in my friend's garage. I didn't have a garage. Okay, this is how sketchy I was. Montana plates, questionable insurance, no garage, but I got a Ferrari. Parked at my friend's garage. The next morning I went to start it up. White smoke billows out the back of the car for like a while. I'm like, oh my God, like what is this? I don't know what this is. Oh my God. I freaked out. I was so scared. I had no money to fix whatever this was. I had made this big choice and spent all my money. And if it broke, I was done. I turned it off. I remember I called you. I was terrified. I called everybody I knew who knew anything about these cars. And later I started it again and there was no smoke, and later I started it other times and there was no smoke, and it never came back. And it was interesting because I bought the car in December and it had always been in Florida. I wonder then and in retrospect if it was just its first time being cold in a long time, and it had its first cold start in literally years, and for some reason that had some effect. And then it was well, was it smoke or was it steam? And I couldn't replicate it because I didn't know, because it didn't happen again. And so I don't know what happened, and I still don't know what happened. But the car never gave me any problems. I owned it for a full year. I got super lucky. I never had a single problem with it. One time I rented it out to be in a movie. It was supposed to be in Ride Along 2. It was parked outside of a club at a club scene in Ride Along 2, but unfortunately, it was not actually shown. It was gonna be in the establishing shot where they show the club, but they cut that shot. But they paid me $1,000 to use it for 2 hours. But I drove that car then, and I had it on YouTube and on Jalopnik, and it really kind of blew up. That and the CarMax Range Rover at the same time was my star rising. And there were a few viral videos that I did with that car, the most viral of which was I let all of my friends drive it. That was a big deal. Finding enough people to drive stick, but I then did a compilation of all of their responses, trying to figure out how to get the gated shifter into gear and all that, and that was funny. And in a time before those cars were very common, I mean, Instagram had just started to exist. You didn't see all that stuff around. Now those cars are kind of ubiquitous on Instagram and on YouTube and all social media, TikTok. But back then it was oh, this is a special thing. It became clear to me a month into the ownership that men who buy these cars to attract women won't. And so I did a video that was somewhat staged of driving it to places where there are women and seeing their responses. I mean, we drove it around Lenox Mall for an hour filming women. I mean, it's the creepiest thing in the world. Not a single one of them looked, right? That. And that was the whole thing. It was that was the video. We were able to get 12 minutes of content of women not caring about my Ferrari. And a couple of the people were like friends of mine who I staged, like we're filling up next to each other in gas and they weren't looking at it. But that was my genuine experience with the car. I just didn't necessarily want to shoot that closely with like random women. And the very last scene, we put a golden retriever on the passenger seat, and then like we had a bunch of women like come up to the car, and that was the point. Like that's what really will attract women. You don't want a Ferrari's not going to do it. It was silly and stupid, but a lot of my videos were back then, and it did the job. I owned it for a year, and then I sold it to a guy in Northern California who still has it. It was a bit of a disappointment, actually. The 360 I never felt was a particularly great car. The front end was too light. The steering and handling wasn't particularly excellent. It did not have much power, but it did the job. It like got me on the map in terms of like, oh, a regular guy talking about his ownership experience with a special car. And every week I would make a new video like, here's why I don't drive it regularly. And you'd talk about potholes and you'd show it going into a pothole. And one time I strapped a TV to the roof of it to show like, if you did daily drive it, what it would be like. And in my opinion, it was one of the early people who like had exotic cars on YouTube. Salamandrin was the other dude at that time. And we were kind of it. And then it exploded and the whole category took off. And now nothing is like cool enough, like nothing in the world. But that was the 360. I did not know at the time that that experience would in fact change my life forever. It was December of 2012, and I knew that I was going to be quitting my desk job. I had been a very good kid. I had gone to a good school. I had gotten a good job after college. And then I went on this crazy path at age 24 where I decided to quit my job and write about cars for a living, which was insane. And it was December of 2012, and I decided that I had been buying and selling and fixing and dealing with all these crappy cars, and it was time to like, if I was gonna do this, I needed to not be spending money in that way, and I needed to buy a rational car. I remember one night I was in bed like scrolling on the internet, and I discovered that CarMax sells cars with Max Care, which is this, at the time it was a 6-year pretty much bumper to bumper warranty. There were a few more exclusions than you would find in a normal car warranty, like a new car, but not many. And I was like, And the really special thing about that was that at that time, CarMax sold some pretty crazy stuff. So I bought the Range Rover, which became famous. That was the car that I bought. I bought it in December of 2012 with this 6-year warranty. But I could have they were selling Audi A8 W12. These are national, so they weren't all like, I bought the Range Rover from the store in Marietta, but they had E60 M5s. They had 1 Series Ms. In fact, it was so weird. I think they must have been getting the 1 Series Ms from like the BMW driving school in South Carolina. There was a time when they had 10 different white 1 Series Ms all listed at once. And I don't know how they were getting them, but I always assumed it was that. And so you could have bought a 1 Series M with a 6-year bumper to bumper. They had an R8 at one point. The funny thing is they refused to sell G-Wagons. What I really wanted was a G-Wagon, but they refused to, and I think still refuse to sell G-Wagons, which is so funny because those are actually pretty reliable cars. There were BMW 760s, there were S65s. In fact, CarMax used to have, probably still does, a filter by cylinder count, and I would often just click on V12. Let's see what they got today. And there were, S65, CL65s. It was not uncommon. They used to sell crazier stuff. And I think what happened is they kind of shrunk the craziness of their inventory to meet like the regular demand. And then they also shrunk the craziness of the warranty. To be fair, you can still get a Macan Turbo or a S-Class with this Max Care. And frankly, I think you'd probably come out ahead. But back then it was you were definitely going to come out ahead. I was planning to not have a lot of money. I had been doing okay. I had like a corporate job and I was writing on the side and not telling my corporate job. But then I was like going to get rid of the corporate job and just focus on the writing. And that was one of the reasons I wanted a car with a warranty. But it was still an opportunity to have a cool car while having kind of like having a little bit of a safety net. And that was what it was. And it worked that way. So I went to the dealership. It was December 8, 2012. And I bought a 2006 Range Rover with a CarMax bumper to bumper 6-year warranty. And I did not know at the time that that experience would in fact change my life forever and the life of CarMax forever. I started writing for Jalopnik, which at the time was the really big car blog. And one week I didn't have anything to write about. And I was like, why don't I write about my Range Rover? and it blew up. I mean, people just were like, I can't believe this is real. I can't believe they sell these warranties. This is insane. The story went totally viral, hundreds of thousands of views. And I was like, okay, I have something here. Then I kind of started rooting for it to break. I never intentionally broke it, but I definitely started being like, okay, like when's the next one? And I mean, Range Rover has this reputation for being tremendously unreliable. Unbeknownst to me, I actually bought the most reliable age of them. The 06 to 09s were of the L322 body, which went from 03 to 12. The 06 to 09s were the ones you wanted. They had the best engine, the best transmission. The later ones, which I couldn't afford, CarMax did offer them, but I couldn't afford them. The later ones had problems with timing chains, as you're well aware. The early ones had a ton of issues, the 03 to 05s. They had a BMW engine and transmission that was not good in the BMWs either. And the 06 to 09s are actually reliable ones, so I actually never had any problems with the main parts of the car. The engine and trans never gave me any issues, but there was enough ancillary crap to build up over time that the warranty story just became amazing. And part of it was that it wasn't a major issue. I posted twice a year. This broke now, this $800 part, okay, this $600 part. And so as you went through the 6 years of warranty, it started to become a pretty good story. So then I started making YouTube videos, and I would make videos as companion pieces to my articles about that car. And it was still an absolute viral thing. Every time I would do it, people were like, Doug's CarMax Range Rover broke again. And this was like now 10 years ago. So a lot of my followers currently don't even know about this or know this story. But occasionally I will get people come up to me on the street and still say, I've been following you since the CarMax Range Rover. But this was the thing I was known for the first 2 years of my career, 3 years. And it's funny now that I have all these other cars, I've launched cars and bids, nobody even remembers it. But it was a huge deal at the time. It's hard to explain now for people who weren't there, but it was a massive deal. Every time I'd write a story about it on Jalopnik, it would go absolutely viral. Everybody, all car enthusiasts by the end of this knew about the MaxCare warranty. And some of them didn't even know I was the impetus. They heard about it third hand from a guy who read one of the articles or something, but it became a massive, massive sensation at the time. In the end, a couple of interesting things happened. Number one, 3 years into the story, I happened to be going to Richmond, Virginia. I was buying a Nissan Skyline GTR that was there, and the CarMax is headquartered there. And so I sent an email, just a random email to their PR people. Hey, you want to get a meal? I don't even know if they know who I am. I've never spoken to them. And they're like, yeah. And then I think it was a student named Casey. And me and him went and had dinner like late at night in downtown Richmond and like chatted about the whole thing. And we like this clandestine meeting of the two sides, right? Like me with the warranty and him with the guy that's in the company. But he told me straight up, he was like, oh, it's obviously done more good for us than bad. Like you can't manufacture a viral story like this. Like companies would kill to have this kind of thing. But one of the other things that happened was CarMax stopped offering the warranty. So it wasn't just me. A lot of people like to blame me for this, but it wasn't just me. MaxCare was an unrealistic warranty product on a lot of the vehicles they were selling. And so not only did they stop selling some of these vehicles, they used to sell just high mileage whatever. As long as it was in nice shape, they would sell it. They stopped selling older Range Rovers, older luxury cars in general. Like they just gave all that up. When I bought my Range Rover, it was 6 years old. I don't even know if they sell 6-year-old Range Rovers anymore. And if they do, it's tight. I was looking at Cayennes the other day. They have one Cayenne Turbo. They stick to kind of the bell curve type of cars. And they shortened the warranty period. So it used to be 6 years, now it's 5. I think it doesn't cover as many things. And on some cars, the mileage limit is much lower. So when I bought it, it was either 100,000 or 125,000 miles max you could choose, up to the mileage on the car. Not 125,000 more miles, but... And when I bought the car, it had 60,000 miles. So I was getting a 6-year, 60,000 mile bumper-to-bumper warranty on a 6-year-old Range Rover. They put a stop to that. I think on a Range Rover now, they would probably only sell you up to 75,000 miles or something, and it's only 5 years, and so the coverage has all changed. The last warranty service on a Range Rover, like everybody with a warranty, we took it in 3 months before the warranty expired, and we're like, okay, dealership, tell us everything it needs, we're gonna fix it all. And it was a huge bill. It was like $8,000 and like another $800 out of pocket that the warranty didn't cover, and that was it. So I paid for the warranty. The warranty was not cheap. Even then they knew they had to charge more. And even then it was graduated. Like a Camry warranty would be $1,800 and a Range Rover warranty would be like $3,500. I think I paid around there. The total payout was, I don't remember the exact number now, but probably around $23,000. And there was some question whether CarMax would try to buy this car back or, if for a normal customer, maybe they would have. But I'll tell you this, I was not their highest payout. There were stories on Reddit at that time of guys getting V10s replaced in those M5s under the MaxCare warranty. And that one repair would have cost more than my total warranty payout. Although my story became famous, I promise you there were bigger warranty payouts than mine. I bought the car for $26,998 or something like that. And at the end, it was essentially worthless. I mean, I think because we had maintained it so well, I probably could have sold it for like $8,000. Interestingly, those L322 Range Rovers actually had kind of a come up on the used market, and nice ones sell for real money now, and maybe I shouldn't have given it away. It now is in a state where it's a $6,000 used car. It was clearly headed that direction too. Any car that lives its life on Nantucket, it's a salt air climate, it's a small island, is not going to have a long life. And that Range Rover, I ended up giving that Range Rover to a friend of mine who lives on Nantucket. Still see it. He's still driving it to this day. It's not in as good a shape. Now that the warranty is not there to cover all the parts, it's not being maintained to the same standard it was. But I saw it this summer. He's still driving it around. It's still doing his thing. It had a tow hitch, and he liked that because he had a flat trailer and he could move some of his own cars around. It's still running. Probably about 140, 150,000 miles at this point. The warranty ended at 125, and we got that servicing done right before that. And then that was the end of the CarMax Range Rover.